Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, and who else? Well, I'll tell you who else. It's the legendary Mike Batt, a music maestro whose timeless hits have shaped generations from penning the Wombling Song for the Wombles to creating the hauntingly beautiful Bright Eyes for Watership Down. Mike's a composer, producer, and songwriter who left an indelible mark on British culture. But he's not just resting on his laurels, he's also a fierce advocate for creators' rights, taking on the rise of AI and the Data Use and Access Bill with the same passion as he's brought to music. Whether it's crafting toppers or challenging the establishment, Mike Batt is a force to be reckoned with, and I'm delighted to welcome him to the show. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you for your very generous introduction.
It's always a thrill. Well, they always say, look, give me a child to the age of 7 and I will show you the man. You were born in Southampton on the 6th of February 1949. What do you remember of your childhood?
Whoa, that would be a long answer if you let me ramble, which I'll try not to. I remember a lot about my childhood because, in fact, when we came on air, and we could see each other first on our Zoom thing. I moved out of the way a book, so it wouldn't be in the way, and it's this. And I've just realised that since you've asked about it, or asked about my life, it's actually fresh in my mind because it's my memoir and it's called The Closest Thing to Crazy. I'm sorry to
It's a
use you.
brilliant book and we should plug it shamelessly. So well done.
Oh, well, okay, let's be shameless and thank you for that. But yes, it goes back. What I do know that syndrome of whatever it's called thing where you flick through the first quarter of someone's autobiography because you don't really want to know where they went to school and who they went down to the tuck shop with or whatever, and you just want to know all about the business end of what they did. And I must say, I did try to clip the wings of that section. There. The thing about my childhood is that we moved around the country a lot. I was born in Southampton, and at the age of 6 months, I decided I didn't like Southampton very much. And I'm just kidding. I love Southampton, but my dad, who was a civil engineer, just having come out of the army after the war, and he got a job there, and then we moved on. Every time he saw a different, better job, a slightly more senior job somewhere, we would move, and so we moved to Eastbourne, then we moved to Coventry, then we moved to York, then we moved to Coventry, and then Bradford. And then I was in Bradford for about 4 or 5 years actually, and that was an interesting experience because we were really kind of Southerners. I was born in, as I say, Southampton, and so I wouldn't say that we were chameleon-esque in changing our accents, but just for purely being accepted. I know there are some very upper class people who just would refuse to, and a lot of very, what you might call working class people who, I'm proud of my accent and I keep it. I was never aware of having an accent, but I am aware now, looking back, that when we moved to Bradford, our sort of southern accents, which weren't posh, but just normally southern, suddenly became sort of flat-voweled, much more northern England kind of accents, because you fitted in better if you said, uh, uh, um, well, I'm not going to do an accent, but it'll waste everyone's time. And you didn't get beaten up quite so much, if you spoke like everyone else. And it's the old thing of tribalism, really. And then we
But
moved down
I mean,
south.
you make an excellent point. Because there really was that divide between North and South at that time, and
Yeah.
I, I went. I also grew up on the South Coast, but went to university up in Durham. And you find, as you say, you're chameleon-like. You want to try and fit in as most people do.
Yes, you do. And it's actually an act of politeness to the people around you, not to be trying to be different by virtue of one's perceived class, because it isn't actual class. It's just a false impression. Albeit I will say that I do have a genuine impression that over the years the people in the maybe it's every country, the people in the capital city think that they own the country, and so the London accent and the Oxford accent and the Cambridge accent, well, not the accent of the locals, but the accent of the people who are educated there. And the people who are educated at Harrow, of course, there is that thing of, and they're all down south, aren't they? And there is a feeling, it has been a feeling over hundreds of years that, Northerners are just, the sort of the workers and absolutely, having lived in Bradford for as long as I did, I realized that's not the case. But it was a rougher place to live when I was a kid. I don't know what it's like now, but it was definitely a place where, if you saw, as I say in my book, if you saw a gang of lads walking down the pavement towards you, you'd just cross, casually cross the road and walk down the other side, so you didn't sort of have to walk through them in case you got punched.
Well, and were you punched when you talk about being beaten up?
Oh no, I use the term loosely. I was definitely punched, but I was punched in the south and I was punched in the mouth. That was not meant to be. That was just me being a sort of um, it was an accidental rhyme. People usually apologise for puns, but that was a rhyme. No, I
The
was.
pun
I
is
mean,
mightier than the sword. Never apologize for a pun.
yeah, I was at school at a grammar school called Peter Symonds in Winchester. It was nothing to do with Winchester College. It wasn't. It had been a public school, but it had been given a grant, so it's grant aided. And yeah, and there were times there where somebody decided they didn't like me, and they happened to be a foot taller than me, and it was a perfectly good idea to come up to me and punch me right on the nose. And so it happened everywhere. It wasn't just that was not a north-south divide thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think one protects oneself by whatever, you hear a lot of comedians say, "Oh, I got funny because I knew that I wasn't good at football."
Yeah.
I suppose in my case, what happened was I learned to play the piano. In fact, it was a Polish kid in Bradford called Kazak Nowakowski, his name was, and he taught me how to play uh, dances, Polish dances on the accordion, button accordion. And then taught myself to play the piano from that.
Yeah.
And that
And I
was
understand that yeah, it was your dad who bought an old piano at a local junk shop.
He did, because he used to he purported not to be musical himself. Excuse me while I derobe. It's a bit warm.
Change of outfits. I think that's quite right. Every chapter we have a change of outfit.
Yeah, different. You should do a little bit of music for every time I take a piece of clothing off. The trouble is, if I take this off, there'll be nothing left.
Ah,
Anyway, moving right along. Yeah, my dad used to buy stuff just because he was very good with his hands. He could do anything. He was a mechanic. He could do mechanical engineering. He was as I say, a civil engineer. He could do electrical work. He could do his own plumbing. I was in awe of him as a person who did all of those practical things. And I have to say that, where we are now in life, my wife of 40 years, Julianne, we have a toolbox in the house, but it's hers. It's not mine. If there's I wouldn't say, well, I can't put shelves up. I can tear them down quite well if necessary, but I'm really not I'm not practical in that sense. So we all have our own different departmental talents, whatever they might be. And I really, on a daily, day-to-day, look after yourself technically basis, I'm not great. But I can do other things like play the piano. And
yeah.
so I used to play the piano down in the pub when I was 14. Again, there was an ulterior motive, which was A, to be socially around, and be able to do something that I could, maybe even impress the odd girl or hopefully more. I don't mean more than just impress them. I mean more than just one. Um, let's be specific. But also playing piano at the Willow Tree pub down in Winchester, if any of your listeners are aware of it, it was the best education in self-taught how to communicate with music because there was this guy, I remember his name, it's Morris, a guy called Morris, who was always in one of the regulars. And when I was in there, I'd be playing away and they'd say, "Oh, do you know Slow Boat to China?"
Right.
And I vaguely heard it on the radio when I was a younger kid. No, not really, I don't, but you sing it and I'll play it. It really was that situation. So I would play, I'd like to get you on a slow boat to China. But it was all like in not in F and not in F sharp. It was in whatever Morris wanted to sing it in, at whatever stage of drunkenness he was in. And we had all these quite people. I suppose some kids might have found it. I say kids. I was 14. It was a perfect way of not getting slung out of the pub,
Right.
just to be the piano player.
Yeah.
But also, it was quite a good way of getting to handle a bunch of people you didn't know. But
Well, as
and
you say, it's like a comedian with the joke cloak, and music is that sort of crutch, if you like, and your passport to all sorts of places. Apart from Morris's request list, what was else in your repertoire when you were playing the piano in the pub?
oh, it was really the old time, well-known songs. Things like Down at the Old Bull and Bush. It really was those days. People didn't come up and ask me for the latest. Well, actually, yeah, I suppose things like Hard Day's Night, new Beatles stuff. I was very fortunate to be of the age where I was 12 or 13 when the Beatles first came out. So on the trolley bus to school down Manningham Lane in Bradford, we'd be discussing the latest Beatles record. That's a bit of a tongue twister. We'd be discussing the latest Beatles record.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, and we'd all go, not sure. This we can work it out. It's rubbish, isn't it? And then we're so good, we love them, but this is terrible. And then the next day it would be, you know what, that record's quite good, really.
Yeah,
And the third one, you know what, I think this is the best record they've ever made, which shows, that's very educational because it showed me that sometimes you do have to listen to something two or three or four times.
right.
And as an A&R man, was starting out in the business, I got a job which was way above my ability, but I didn't say no to it when they made me head of A&R of a small American record label, Liberty Records,
Yes. Well, it was
which became
interesting because I wanted to come on to that. I mean, you began your pop music career when 18, I think you were answering an advert placed by my good friend Ray Williams in what was the NME, the
ah
New Musical Express, on behalf of Liberty Records. And you were
yeah,
initially signed as a songwriter, but by the age of 19, is that right? You became head of A&R
that's
for the
right.
label? Incredible.
Yes, for some reason I don't know. Well, I do know one of the reasons was that Ray, having found he found Elton John, Bernie Taupin, and me all on the same day.
Yes.
Can you believe? Through the same advertisement. And we didn't know each other. We might have been sitting in reception together, as far as I know. In fact, that can't have happened because Bernie actually sent his lyrics in.
Right.
And Ray hadn't met him when he was impressed by these lyrics. And Elton happened to go in and was not a lyricist. And so even though Ray tried to sell him to his bosses as a potential signing, they all said, "Oh no, he doesn't write his own songs," which is weird for back in those days because a lot of singers didn't write their own songs.
Right.
Anyway, so then Ray gave him the lyrics, and Ray then left, not immediately, but eventually to manage Elton, and
Yes.
he was there in the beginning of it all, and there was an empty office which actually isn't the office I got. I got this much posher office for some reason because the publisher left the company. It's all too convoluted for me to bore your listeners with, but there was an A&R meeting where I had already put a single out as a signed artist on the label, and Bob Reisdorf, who ran the company, an American, lovely American guy. I wasn't in the meeting. I didn't go to the meetings. I was an artist. You just did what you were asked. And I'd written this arrangement for a B-side of one of my singles, and he said, "Who produced this record?" And they told him. Mike produced it himself. So on the spur of the moment, Bob just said, "Oh, give Mike the job of head of A&R then," which implies by the accent you'll have realised he was American. And I was immediately sort of given this job. I wasn't paid very much,
Do you
but
remember
I
how
did
much it
have,
was?
yeah, £25 a week.
Ah,
Which was slightly less than my secretary was getting. She was getting £36 a week, I
oh,
think.
good. Well, a lot less then. I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah. But she'd been there longer, anyway, but what I did have is this beautiful big office with Picasso lithographs on the walls and a piano at the age of sort of just turned 19. It was crazy. All these important managers and people would come in and say, I'd like you to sign my artist. And I would look wise and listen and think, what does sign in fact mean? Of course, I just signed myself, but I just signed, comma, myself. And things like lease tape deals, you learned all about it, but you learned as you went. And so I picked the business up as I went. And things like contractual work, I got involved in that, not by drafting contracts for Liberty and United Artists, but by negotiating when I first signed to them, and by just wor learning what the fair terms of let's say lease taping, leasing the tape of a single or an album might be, so that in later life, when I was negotiating with record companies for my own career, I had a quite a good what do you call it, education, I suppose, in practical A&R administration and
And
contractual
it
work.
is interesting because those days were notoriously bad for artists, weren't they? I mean, when you signed to Metric Music, which is owned by Liberty Records,
Yeah.
your contract was not the best, was it? No advance, no stipend, tied into compositions for what, 5 years on a 50-50 royalty split?
Well, yeah, you have done your homework. So thank you for reading to page 22 at least, or whatever it was. Um, yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I, didn't even think how bad it was at the time. But about a year later, when that said publisher left, who was a great guy called Alan Keane, he loved his jazz. We used to go to Ronnie Scott's together. He
Right.
sold with him. He was 36, which I thought was terribly old, and I was sort of 19. But lovely, lovely guy. He had been the head of Radio London. He'd been the head of programs for Radio London. And when the Marine Broadcasting Act was signed and all the pirates came ashore, he got the job as the publisher. Anyway, so when he left to form his own company, Alan King Music, this posh office became available, and little Mike Batt got it as his kingdom. And okay, it wasn't like that really, because you just sat where you were told, and I just was told to sit in this posh office, which was rather good. It was just a bit of fun really, and I had a card that said Mike Batt, head of A&R, Liberty Records, so I could get into any club I wanted to. And I say in the book it would have been very good for pulling girls, except for the fact that I already had I was very lucky to have a girlfriend at the time who was delightful. So I didn't need to sort of, should we say, flex my business card in that direction.
Right. What was her name? What was the name of the girlfriend at that stage?
Michelle Green. I rang her, got in touch with her. In fact, I think we'd met her. Julianne, my wife, and I met up with her. Oh, well, a long time ago. When I first got together with Julianne, her and her husband, and the family. So I'd kept in touch with her and a couple of other girlfriends I've had over the years, and anyway, she was lovely. And say I rang her before I published my book
Right.
to say, look, do you mind my mentioning you by name? If not, I can change your name, and if you don't even want to be in it, I'll take the section out. She said, no, it's fine. And I think she gave me 1 point of information that needed changing, which was fine. But I did that in the 2 or 3 occasions where you've probably read that I had, should we say, occasion to uh, what's the word? Well, anyway, girlfriends I had. Well,
Yes,
I'm looking
yes.
for posh
Well,
words
and
to
it's
say.
good because a lot of books are sold on the index, aren't they? They look at the names that I mentioned, and well
Oh
done
yeah.
you for going back to the people and seeing if they really mind. Did anybody
Oh
object to what you said about them in the original drafts?
no, there was a lovely young lady with whom I kept in touch. She's no longer young, but she's still lovely, and she's an Australian lady, girl called Julie Murphy. And I did write to her and say, listen, can I send you this section, just as I said I did with Michelle? And what do you think? Is it okay? Because she's married, and I didn't know whether her husband knew she'd had a boyfriend who was me. And she said, no, it's all fine. The only thing is that when I got, it was a tiny little thing. When she got fired from CBS Records because she was a secretary at CBS Records, she got fired for sort of fraternizing with the artists, put it that way, by having a relationship with me, which I thought was most unfair.
It is unfair.
Yeah, and I said that that was the case, and she said actually they just didn't renew my contract. I was a freelance really on a contract, so she just wanted that tiny detail. She then went to work for a big nightclub in Sydney, and she did very well. She but it was that kind of level of detail. It wasn't
But it's
like, oh
more,
my
did
God,
nobody object to say, please, even though that story is true, please don't put it in?
no, or my husband will be upset because I
Yes.
never told him that I knew you. There was none of that at all. In fact, I only talked about three or four people actually, but I definitely wanted to make sure they were happy to be in the book or to be anonymous or whatever.
Yes. So you didn't change any names at all in the book. It's a complete and accurate representation.
Indeed, yeah.
No, good.
Uh,
Well,
yeah.
and talking about your A&R work, I mean, you signed and produced Tony McPhee's band, the Groundhogs. You also co-wrote and played piano on Hap's Hash and the Coloured Coats album Western Flyer. Produced and released a cover of the Beatles, Your Mother Should Know. Was that all in that sort of period?
It was. I really, to use the cliche, hit the ground running because suddenly there was all this big roster of artists, many of whom had been signed by Ray Williams before I arrived. Excuse me. But some of which I signed, and one of the ones I signed was the Groundhogs blues band, and I produced their first record. Um, and it was the beginning of a relationship which actually was uh, particularly brought to the company, not by me, but by somebody called Andrew Lauder, who was the production manager for the company. He had his eyes on being an A&R manager, I have to tell you. So I realized afterwards when I left the company that I had the feeling that everybody wanted my job. I think the person who mostly wanted my job was Andrew Lauder, but I hope he's listening and he has a good sense of humor. But he was probably doing it anyway already because he had a very good ear to the ground. He was one of those people who just knew lots of people, and he was what I wasn't, which was almost a professional fan.
Right.
Just as journalists often they know a lot more than the artists because they are they write articles about them and they're in a way they're fans, certainly observers. And I wasn't that. I was more interested in writing my own songs and stuff like that. So he would have been a better A&R man than me. And eventually, when I left the company, he did take my place. But while I was there, I produced the Groundhogs, and that was great because I was into blues. The thing I would play if I sat down at a piano and if I was sort of amongst company I didn't know and I wanted to play something that I knew I wouldn't screw up, I would just play a blues. And I was very flattered in later life when I worked with Katie Melua and I was in the band as the piano player. And Henry Spinetti was the drummer. Henry Spinetti, famous for being in Procol Harum,
Yes.
eventually then doing a hell of a lot of work with Eric Clapton and very much a respected and quite heavy blues drummer. And he was always I met the loveliest compliment he gave me as actually one time he just whispered it to me because he's the brother of Henry Spinetti
Yes.
of the actor what's his Victor Spinetti,
Victor
yeah,
Spinetti. Yeah.
who worked with the Beatles and
Yeah.
various other,
Amazing character. Yes.
yeah, indeed, that's sadly no longer with us, but Henry is. And he whispered to me one night. He said, "You're the dirtiest piano player I've ever worked with," which I took as a compliment because he meant that I sort of hit the piano hard and sounded as if I meant it, and there was something, maybe a little bit debauched about the way I played the piano, perhaps in a sort of George Melly kind of way.
Right. The glorious stuff. Well, I mean, you walked away from your contract and you took legal advice. And I think there's a pattern throughout your life about looking at rights and so on and so forth.
Yes.
They basically said the contract's going to be unenforceable. And those sort of contracts in those days, obviously, you signed a number of artists with that contract, I assume. How do you feel about that now?
Oh, no, I didn't negotiate the terms of the contract very often. I would say, yes, we should sign these people, and then it would be over to the legal department to do the signing. And in fact, they'd moved on. They had hit the ground running, but just before they signed me. That's why they had to put an advertisement in the paper saying, we want talent, which we all thought, wow, they usually tell you to get lost. Never mind, put adverts in the paper, record companies. So, yeah, it's not inexperienced because they're quite a big record company in
Yeah.
America. But they had the unfair contract that I signed, which was lovely because I could walk out of it without any nonsense. The following year, when I followed Alan Keane to go and sign with him when Alan left. But no, I didn't ever really have much to do with the actual signature of the deals with artists. That was somebody else. But by then, I'd already made my point to the company that you've got to pay people the going rate at least.
Yeah.
We'll pay them something. Because the reason my contract was no good was because they didn't even pay me anything.
Right.
I only got paid as an executive when I joined, and that was a pittance.
Yeah.
But so in fact, yes, it was 70 years. They keep this stuff until 70 years after my death, which is the full life of copyright. They have everything I write. They had 50-50, which is a very low percentage these days. And 75-25 or 80-20 is a much more usual split these days. So, it was back in those days, and that was a fairly normal contract, but it was still so weak I could walk out of it.
Yeah. And I think that's the point, isn't it? Because had those early days of that sort of industry where those lots of those sort of contracts and obviously artists were coming out of it.
It
How
did.
did you decide that you liked a particular artist to get signed, even when you didn't do the actual contract negotiation directly?
Let me just put my chair up a bit. My tastes, and I say tastes, I don't mean my good taste, just my taste. I mean, what I signed, what I liked. Now, Hapshash and the Coloured Coat were already signed to the label
Right.
and had been signed, I think, probably by Ray Williams, and they were a really psychedelic community. There were two members of the psychedelic community, in fact, of members of Swinging London's underground set,
Right.
really. And I kind of lucked into it because I was the A&R person. They'd made a record. It had been the first record ever pressed on red vinyl. Ta-da! And they were absolute sort of social set. They were quite posh, actually. One of them was Nigel Weymouth. I think he was probably the on something.
Yeah.
I don't mean he was on something. He was on something, actually. He was on quite a lot of things. But he was probably the on Nigel Weymouth, I'm guessing. But I think he was a lord or something. Anyway, he then became after all these years later, and he's still around, I think, became a very, very fine painter, portrait painter, and what you might call, well, purveyor of the plastic arts, should we say. But at the time, I mean, the thing that they owned up to immediately on meeting me, this young, besuited executive with a tie, um, was that they weren't really musicians. They were ideas people, and they needed a musician to make up a third member of the band. And would I consider being that musician? And of course I would, and it's great. I was sort of joining. I was getting cool points by joining these shaggy haired, patchouli oil wearing people who spent a lot of time in the King's Road. And because I was very innocent, I didn't even smoke dope, and it used to make me sick. It wasn't because I didn't want to. I'd have loved to have, done whatever it did to you. And I'm not saying I'm innocent because I have done it since, and but I don't like it. and it makes me sick. So I probably count on the fingers
You
of.
say you've done it since. I mean, more than once if it makes you sick.
Yeah, I've tried it. I've gone back to it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about when I was sort of 25 or something, or when I was 35, and maybe once 10 years ago. I don't know. When someone's got a joint, you go, okay, I'll just have a puff, and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't done that because it just isn't. It's like I don't know. It's like being a vegetarian, or but being a vegetarian is usually a choice,
Right.
but it's a feeling of there was something almost like an allergy. It went straight to my lungs and made me feel like, well, not very good. Actually, what's the word? Nauseous. That's the
Right.
word. I felt nauseous when I did dope. So I didn't, should we say, fall into that habit. And I wasn't really sophisticated enough to know about things like heavier drugs. No one came, people didn't sidle up to you and say, do you want some, you know, what's the one they pump into your arm? That Eric Clapton had
Yes.
the heavier drugs, you
Yes,
know,
the heroin and various other things.
yeah,
Yes.
heroin, stuff like that. I mean, I just didn't come across it. No one ever said to me, "Oh, let's do some heroin or something." It just wasn't anything that I think maybe I just looked. I did look very young when I was young.
Right.
When I was 18 and looking after this A&R department, I looked about 15.
Right.
It must have been a right shock for people coming in the door of this big posh office to meet the head of A&R to realize that this sort of schoolboy type with
Right.
a tie on was sitting there waiting to talk, to talk to them. It was quite a laugh though. It was quite good.
I know
Uh,
that's
uh,
fantastic, and it's good actually because we see so many people in the industry whose lives have been destroyed and those around them destroyed by drugs, and it's good that well, it's good that you didn't go down that route.
yeah, I did. I dabbled once with not once or twice when people had, and I say it in this book, where people have been doing coke at a place where I've been, and they said, "Oh, would you like a line of coke?" The first time, well, the time I nearly said the first time I had a line of coke. I should have said the first time I didn't have a line of coke
Right.
was if you've read the book, you'll know the story I'm about to say. It was we were invited to the residence, temporary residence, actually, of a famous pop star who was throwing a rock star, actually, who was throwing a Christmas party. And someone nudged me and said, Mike, there's something happening in the billiard room. And so I went into the billiard room, and there were lines of Coke all lined up on the billiard table. And that people were doing it, and I sort of didn't know what to do. So someone gave me a fiver all rolled up, ready to go. And I could see they were doing it with a nostril. I know I sound like the most innocent person on earth, but anyway, so I leant down and stuck it up one nostril, leant forward, and instead of snorting in quickly, which is what you got to do, um, for those who don't know, I snorted out quickly and blew the whole lot of about probably 20 lines of coke all over this green baize of this billiard table, irretrievably so, because you couldn't scrape it back. You'd have all green baize in it and everything like that. So I wasn't the most popular person at the party at that particular moment. But I
And
think they probably,
whose party was it?
well, I'm not going to say. I think let's just leave it as one of those things where buy the book and you'll find out.
Wow.
But yeah, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to say because it was way in the past, and
Yes.
that person's probably talked an awful lot about those things that But I don't know. I just rather there's something in me just saying let's just leave it where
Oh
it.
no, no, no! It's a beautiful ad for that brilliant book. So no, do buy the book. You can find out that. Mike, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be looking more at your glorious career and also how you've become a big advocate for artists' rights. But for now, Mike Batt, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.